Blog Talk Radio.
Hi, everyone. This is Marty McDermott, the president of Franchise Interviews, and I can't start today's show without talking about the ISO 10002. You know, some people just love to complain, but companies have a responsibility to care. The International Organization for Standardization, ISO, has revised ISO 10002, the standard for complaint handling. This document enables organizations to foster a customer-focused environment open to feedback, heightening their customer satisfaction. You can get the ISO 10002 standard from the American National Standards Institute, ANSI, the U.S. member body of ISO. Visit ANSI.org/complain to learn more. That's ANSI.org/complain to learn more.
Franchise Interviews. From Easton, Pennsylvania to Sydney, Australia, you're listening to Franchise Interviews. Franchise Interviews. Welcome to Franchise Interviews. Franchise Interviews has been giving an up-close, behind-the-scenes look at franchising and entrepreneurship. Listen to interviews with franchisers, franchisees, franchise authors, franchise experts, and attorneys. And now, welcome your host, Marty McDermott, and Franchise Interviews.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of Franchise Interviews. With over 14 years now, we've been asking the Franchpreneurs one-on-one. I'm your host, Marty McDermott. I'm the president of Franchise Interviews, and we have a great show today. Well, we're meeting with Jon Ostenson, and Jon is a consultant, investor, author, and international speaker specializing in the area of non-food franchising. Having served as the president of Inc. 500 franchise system and is now a multi-brand franchisee himself, Jon is uniquely positioned to educate others on franchising and franchise selection. We're going to talk to Jon about that in just a moment on Franchise Interviews. So stick around because we have a great show.
Need a business loan? Talk to Diamond Financial Services, the experts in franchise financing nationwide. Whether you're looking to start a franchise, acquire an existing franchise, or expand your territory through opening new locations, Diamond Financial stands by your side start to finish. From pre-qualification to packaging and presenting your application to securing a financial commitment, and through the loan closing process, Diamond Financial is there. While you're waiting, thousands of others are making their financial dreams come true. Don't wait any longer. Pre-qualify now by completing a confidential, no-obligation financial analysis. Let's face it, traditional banks just aren't in the business of financing small business. At Diamond Financial, we specialize in securing franchise loans from $100,000 to $3 million and equipment leasing up to $150,000. Let us help you get started. Go to www.franchisefunding.net or call 877-508-2274. That's franchisefunding.net, 877-508-2274.
Hi, this is Connie McDermott, Administrative Assistant for Franchise Interviews, LLC, and you're listening to Franchise Interviews.
Franchise Interviews. From Easton, Pennsylvania to Sydney, Australia, you're listening to Franchise Interviews. Franchise Interviews.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to a very special edition of Franchise Interviews. With over 14 years now, we've been asking the Franchpreneurs one-on-one. I'm your host, Marty McDermott. I'm the president of Franchise Interviews, and as we were saying earlier, we have a great show today. Well, we're meeting with Jon Ostenson, and Jon is a consultant, investor, author, and international speaker specializing in the area of non-food franchising. And having served as the president of an Inc. 500 franchise system and is now a multi-brand franchisee himself, Jon's uniquely positioned to educate others on franchising and franchise selection. Hi, Jon. How are you? Welcome to the show.
Marty, thanks for having me. I love the show. It's a privilege to be with you.
Oh, thank you, Jon. The privilege is mine. We would like to ask our guests, where are you calling from this morning, Jon?
Calling from Atlanta, Georgia.
Nice, nice. Is that where you're pretty much headquartered in Atlanta, Jon?
It is, and most of our investments are here in Atlanta as well. However, I do have a few satellite locations, but no, Atlanta's home down here in the South.
That's terrific. So we've been hosting the show now 14 years, Jon, and I find that, every single guest seems to have a story as far as how they got involved in franchising. Maybe you can kind of like go back to that beginning and tell our guests how you got involved in franchising.
Yeah, like so many, I had a corporate background, had a great run with some large Fortune 100, Fortune 1000 companies, and always had that itch to do something a little more entrepreneurial. And for me, I kind of stepped into it. I had the opportunity to step in with ShelfGenie based here in Atlanta, a national franchise system that had some really good growth, and stepped in as president, ran the home office day-to-day, supporting franchise owners with all their marketing needs, the call center, the technology team, product development. It really had just an amazing experience and had the privilege to see how franchising is such a better path to business ownership for so many. And also had my eyes open to the fact there are other sectors in franchising outside of food. So long story short, which I'll fill in the blanks in a minute, but ended up partnering with the founder of ShelfGenie, and we're doing what we consider some pretty neat things now.
What do you like most about franchising, John? Something kind of like drew you to the franchise model. What was it that you liked the most?
One, you're working towards profitability. You're not trying to figure out how to become profitable. And so many of my clients now on the consulting side are, looking at acquisition type entrepreneurship or starting from scratch. And so I love having those conversations and just weighing the pros and cons and helping them understand why I consider franchising to be such a great path.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about, FranBridge Consulting, John, because I know you're involved with that now, and maybe a little bit about the history of FranBridge.
Yeah, so FranBridge has two different arms. We've got the capital side and we have the consulting side. On the capital side, we're multi-brand franchisees ourselves of a pool cleaning business, a home cleaning business, and carpet cleaning business here in Atlanta. I've also invested with clients of mine in a driveway repair franchise as well as a mosquito franchise up in Nashville. But where I spend most of my time, because we've set up those businesses to have GMs running the day-to-day, so I'm more of an advisor or consultant to them. It allows me to spend the vast majority of my time working with clients on the consulting side. So I'm affiliated with a franchise consulting company. We work with over 300 brands, helping play matchmaker. So I love taking clients through the process and helping them understand the opportunities in front of them.
And it seems to me, John, in studying your background, I know you do a presentation, franchising. It's not all about food. And as if you listen to the show, we have a lot of food franchises on the show. I always say that I kind of joke around that, I hope I never have to interview another pizza franchise, because I feel like I've interviewed so many of them over the years, but maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and what you talk about in that presentation, because I think that's an interesting topic.
Yeah, no, there are a few presentations I give, and the one on the non-food side, for me, my background is not food. I personally don't have an interest in food. I have a lot of respect for people that do. It's just not my thing. And so instead of about half the world out there is food related within franchising, I've decided to focus all of my attention outside of food. And what I have found, Marty, is about 95% of my consulting clients feel the same way. They don't have an interest in food. Now, there's a 5% that feels passionately about food, but 95% right now. And I think that was accelerated due to COVID, but no. And so by branding it as non-food franchising, it does raise people's eyebrows as to franchising. What else is out there? So I love having that conversation.
There's a lot of books out there. Over the years, I got involved in franchising in 1999, John. And over the years, I've read a lot of great books on franchising. And one of the ones that is on my hit list is your book, is The Franchise Path. Why did you write the book? And maybe you could talk a little bit about the book as well.
Yeah, I was inspired by, there are franchise books, as you said, but inspired by a few out there that take a fictional tone to teaching truths of a business. And so I think like Lencioni, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and how he tells a narrative and a tale around the teamwork. And so the Franchise Path, it's a fictional tale of several individuals that, are antsy to leave the corporate world. And one ends up going to tech startup, one ends up going the franchising path, and then another one gets a little gun shy and ends up staying in the corporate world for a long period of time. But ultimately it tracks with them over time and checks in with them every 5 years. And I'm able to weave a lot of principles into the book and just kind of show what that path can look like for someone that's interested.
So some of the other topics that you talk about, John, is one of them is why franchising is the better option versus a startup. You kind of talked about, you kind of hit upon, some of the initial ones, but, do you want to expand a little bit on that? Because I think that's another interesting topic.
What I share with people is when I look at franchising, I think about the benefits being, it may be a recognizable brand. Oftentimes it may not be. In food, I think that brand really matters. Oftentimes in other ones, maybe it's less important because, you have emerging franchisors out there. But then you've got the business model. Again, you know what it takes to build a profitable business. You've got a playbook, that takes you through the operations and the marketing and the hiring and every piece of it. You've got a coach on the sidelines, if you will, in that franchisor that has aligned interests with you. In other franchise owners, I found in my experience, both as a franchisor and now as a franchisee, there's so much wealth of knowledge out there when you tap into your peer group of other franchise owners. And again, they're incentivized in the same way that you are. The more valuable you make your local business, the more valuable theirs will be for the system. So, in addition to that, I love franchising because you're going in eyes wide open. You've obviously got the FDD with your item 19. You're able to go through validation, ask other franchise owners about their experience. What's the support been like? How fast was the ramp up? And now it's interesting, Marty, I'm a member of the Entrepreneurs Organization, and I have quite a few clients that have started successful startups over time and built them into multi-million-dollar businesses. A lot of them have an interest in franchising. In some cases, I have to explain to them, you're too entrepreneurial. So if someone can't stay within the lines and wants to put their own thumbprints all over everything, franchising may not be the best path for them. However, for so many that have already started their own businesses, they love the idea of being able to step into something that has been somewhat scripted ahead of time.
I had a gentleman on the show a long time ago. His name was George Native, and he started, I think it was Boston Market, John, and he said something very clever once. He said that, franchising gives you the opportunity to start on third base. He's a baseball fan, and he's saying, and when you're on third base, it's much easier to get quicker to home than it is by just starting, from scratch, like you mentioned, is creating the system and, avoiding a lot of the pitfalls, as that a lot of franchisors have made in the beginning, So I think that's fantastic. We find, in doing this show such a long time now, John, is I found that, a lot of people who kind of express interest in franchising in the early phases, they don't know where to begin because it seems like there's so much out there today, isn't there? I've seen all different numbers. Like sometimes it's 3,000 systems or 3,500 systems in the U.S. And so many of them, they don't even know where to begin. From everything you've learned up to this point, what advice would you give to our listeners in their quest to buy a franchise?
Yeah, so starting at a high level, there are close to 4,000 franchise systems, and there are new ones coming on board all the time. And if you look at their websites, they all are putting their best foot forward. So you really want to know as a potential investor or owner what's behind the scenes. And so what we've done with the FCC is we've culled that down to around 300 brands that we feel have a strong leadership team, great financial models, good validation. We have relationships with the vast majority of those. And then from there, I take clients through a process, a several-step process, and we talk about different dimensions and how do you look at one business versus another, and what do you want your day-to-day to look like, and do you like large teams or small teams? And we go through just a lot of factors and what is that long-term plan for them. And ultimately what I find is, we hit on funding, we hit on legal, we hit on all sorts of aspects through the process. And ultimately, I find about 80% of my clients end up buying into something that was not on their radar previously. Wow. In fact, it could have been further from their radar. But, once we peel back that onion and I really get to know them and I expose them to the types of opportunities, I just had an attorney buy into a mosquito franchise outside of Boston. Last month I did a couple of deals in the property services space. We did one, there was an IV drip bar up in New Jersey. We did up in Raleigh. We had a auto-related one. There's just so many sectors that, again, people don't think of when they think of franchising. Once we go through those, and I'm able to share with them that, hey, if you look at the website today, you might see 5 locations for this brand. However, they just did 60 deals. These are going to be opening up over the next 6 months. So it's understanding kind of the story behind them and how do we look at franchisors at different stages of development. A really interesting data point. The sources I subscribe to and put a lot of credence in are projecting franchise sales in 2021 to be up 40% over pre-pandemic levels. Let that sink in. That is a big number.
That's amazing.
And what I'm seeing in my business, Marty, is we're well north of that 40% number year to date. There's an unprecedented level of interest. I think there was prior to COVID, but COVID only exacerbated and accelerated people want that sense of control. They want to scratch that itch that they've had for a long time. And so I'm having a blast, absolute blast, working with great people, helping them connect with the right opportunities, learning the new brands and business models that are coming down the chute. It's a great time to be in franchising. However, it's also a very competitive time in that great markets and great brands are going very fast.
That's terrific. I mean, those are some amazing numbers, John. I haven't seen those numbers. I remember there was one year, in doing the show, because we've been doing such a long time, but there have been years like that, where you've seen like just this incredible growth, in franchising, and I think that's really exciting. It reminds me, many years ago, I had these two gentlemen on the show, John, and I think originally they were looking for a food franchise, and they ended up in a window cleaning franchise, and they said they loved it, you know what I mean? But kind of like your story is they never in a million years, they said, would ever picture themselves going into a window cleaning franchise. It wasn't even, as you said, on their radar, you know what I mean? And they're very happy, and they became, multi-level franchisees, and that's why I think, your type of service and your experience is so important. Do you have advice, John, like as far as, we have all different types of brands on the show. We have small brands, the start of, with maybe like 10 units. And then we've had other ones, like we have had the biggest, franchisers, in the industry. What advice do you give? Like you kind of hinted on it earlier, but sometimes the brands are less known. Are there advantages to sometimes getting involved with maybe a franchise that maybe the brand is less known compared to, let's say, Subway or, which has, tens of thousands of units? What are some of the differences?
That is an excellent question, Marty. What I share with my clients, because we do face this oftentimes, is the pros and cons of both. Let's say you've got your Subways of the world, those that have hundreds or even thousands of units, and then those that may have 10 or 20 units. So for the larger brands, the pros there would be, it is a well-oiled machine. They have seen every situation. They know every scenario. They know how different markets work. They've tested all the marketing vehicles. But you may go in and be franchise owner number 791, and while they'll support you, it's just not the same. And, I oftentimes lean, and I'm a little biased because this is where we place our personal investment, but more towards those emerging franchises. And but there's some criteria that I look for when I analyze this. With those emerging brands, the pros would be, you've got a seat at the table. You've got to say, go in, you're franchise owner number 15, and they know you by name. And you were able to get the prime territory in your market. You're not working around someone else's territory. Now, the downside would be maybe there are marketing vehicles that haven't been tested. So I always want to make sure that franchisors are okay with us experimenting. This is what we're doing with a few of our brands right now. With that emerging brand, you could say it's a little more risky. I definitely want to see it as a model's been proven out. I like to see it in an industry with competitive advantages over the peer group. But I also look at that leadership team. That is so important to me and to my clients is, does that franchisor have previous franchise experience? Or if they don't, are they an industry guy and they've brought in franchise experience around them? I think franchising can be a different animal, and I want to make sure we've got that support for the franchise owners from that leadership team. So, a good example of that, I think of Scott Marr with Koala Insulation. Scott and I got to know each other about a year and a half ago. He was the founder of Fleet Clean, built up that franchise system with a couple hundred units, had a great exit, started Koala Insulation, saw an opportunity in that $52 billion market. And when I got to know him, he had 5 locations. I said, Scott, this one's getting ready to go on a run. He built it to scale, and they've now got 160 territories sold and growing within 18 months. And so being able to identify those winners, and Scott, I knew, had that background and that understanding of how franchising works. He's just now translating it to a different industry. That's what I look for.
Do you find, John, that some of the people that you work with in the beginning, do they think small? We had Michael Gerber on the show a long time ago, and he said that, a lot of entrepreneurs, they fail not because they think too big, but they think too small. Do a lot of them have the mindset initially of it's just like one single unit, and then they don't think anything above that? Or are the people that you've worked with, do they see the big picture, like the story that you kind of just mentioned?
The vast majority of the ones that I work with are multi-territory, and they typically start out with 3 or 5 territories. That being said, I've got a deal signing this week for a Serve Pro style franchise that up in New Jersey that is a 1-unit deal, and he plans to open up more territories over time, but he's hesitant out of those. And so everyone's different in their approach. But there are advantages to going multi-territory out of the gate, and you don't open up all territories on day one. You start marketing in a few zip codes within one, and then you expand from there. But you've secured that territory, and I always tell my clients, what's the downside here? I mean, ultimately, you decide not to open up those other ones where you can sell them down the road. So, I definitely find with Michael Gerber, great example there. I mean, you think of like the growth mindset. And, when I was a franchisor on the ShelfGenie side, we would take candidates through our Discovery Day process and, tell them everything that we would do for them and support them. And we would oftentimes get this blank stare at the end, and the franchise owner would say, well, what do I do every day? What am I supposed to do? And my answer was always, and this is true, this is what separates the average franchise owner from the great ones, is your ability to work with people. Your ability to know that local market, get out and then hire, attract, and retain and incentivize, and ultimately make tough calls with talent is really the biggest factor.
Yeah, I think that's well said, John. I know you also talk about, the financial aspect. You talk about financials of franchising. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, John, because that's always a big one for our guests too, our listeners. Is the financial part of it. It's a big decision, isn't it? What do you usually advise when it comes to the financial part?
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple of thoughts there. So first off, from a funding standpoint, you have different options. It can be self-funded. It can be self-funded through retirement, what we call a ROBS program, where you roll over your 401k or IRA. We work with Guidant, FranFund, Ben and Trent's, all those guys. Or it can be an SBA loan, either the Express loan or the 7A loan, or it can be alternative financing as well. But the question people oftentimes have is, how much does it cost to get into a business? I'd say a lot of the deals that we're doing right now are in that $500 billion property services market. That's just really been attractive to a lot of people over the past 12 months. And within that, if you were to do one territory, you could get in for as low as $90,000 or $100,000. Obviously, if you're doing 3 territories, you're probably closer to $200,000. So I'd say the majority of the deals I do are probably in the $150,000 to $250,000 range. That's probably about 75% of my deals, and then the others would be higher, more retail based. So that would be categorized in your item 7. Your item 7 within the FDD is where it discloses your all-in investment. It's typically given as a range. It includes your franchise fee, includes your startup, working capital, typically for about 3 to 6 months, and then it includes any build-out cost, equipment cost, truck cost, inventory, and such. And then on the financial side, the more exciting side, the item 19 of how much can you make by buying into the franchise system. First, I always explain to my clients that there's 3 components here. One is, what is that annual cash flow going to look like, once you're up and running? And then secondly, you've got to remember you're building towards an exit. There's going to be a value down the road. You're building an asset that should pay off several times over what you initially put into the business, so don't lose sight of that. And then third, especially if you're coming from the corporate world, you can now write off a lot of expenses as a small business owner. Let's be honest, it's one of the last bastions of tax preferable treatment as being a business owner today. And so that is another thing when you're comparing apples to apples to take into account. But what I find is a lot of people really have their eyebrows raised when we talk about what you can make in franchising. They're typically your EBITDA margin is somewhere between 15% and 50%. Oftentimes, the ones I work with are around that 25% mark. And when you extrapolate that over the revenue, it's really an attractive return.
Do you find too, John, that, some of the people that you work with, do they get involved with multiple brands, like as and expanding their portfolio? Like you mentioned, the one gentleman, he looked into Serve Pro and he starts off with 1 unit. But do some of your clients, do they look at other brands as well, to kind of like add to their portfolio? And is that a good idea, to kind of like, I had to use the word diversify, but, to go outside other brands?
Absolutely. I call it franchising as an asset class. It's looking at franchising as another piece of that portfolio, and there are a lot of ways to cut it. That's exactly what we're doing here in Atlanta. So, my two business partners and I, we brought in a few investors. We've gone deep. We currently own 3 brands within that entity in Atlanta, and we plan on expanding that to additional brands over time. But no, I'm doing deals right now in Phoenix and in Maryland and in South Carolina, where each of my clients is going with that multi-brand strategy, and they're building up a team that, it leads to so many great things. You attract better talent. You can promote within, provide all sorts of opportunities. But if you're able to, especially in complementary type businesses, if you're able to get that referral marketing, reduce the cost of customer acquisition on the front end, on the back end, have shared services and producing economies of scale, it's a win-win.
Yeah, it is. It's a great strategy, John. So what's in your future, John? If you could look into a crystal ball, maybe 3 years, 5 years down the road, where do you see yourself in the organization?
Yeah, no, first off, on the consulting side, I absolutely love what I do, and so would love to continue with this. I've seen lives change, and being able to truly, tangibly help people. I love what I do, and so definitely there's that component. I like every 3 or 4 months placing an investment with a client for those that are looking for an equity partner. So over the next couple of years, I plan to build out that portfolio of more passive income streams. And then ultimately what we're doing with FranBridge Capital is really exciting. And that's why we're able to bring some investors on board with us with what we're building here. So we've got some young talent, great GM. He's 27 years old, leading the teams. And it's fun to coach him and just kind of watch that growth. So it couldn't be more bullish or excited about kind of the direction that we're on. And like I said, there's an unprecedented level of interest in the market. And a big piece of what I do is, really try to expose, hey, there's other sectors out there, whether it be in health and wellness or in automotive or in the property services, like I said, which home services, B2B services. There's just a lot of ways to make money, and ultimately it comes down to, which is your best path. But, fortunate and blessed to be where I am now, to have had my eyes opened, come from the corporate world. I think it was a great run. I appreciate everything, but have never looked back since make that turn.
Did you see yourself as a young person? If you can go back in time, John, did you see yourself doing this, or, was this kind of like a surprise to you? Like if I were to ask your young self, when you were in your 20s, did you see yourself doing this in the future, or was it kind of a surprise to you?
No, I definitely saw myself in business ownership, did not know it would be through franchising. And, again, I thought fast food when I thought of franchising, and didn't have my eyes open really until I moved in with ShelfGenie. So, no, it was hard for me to leave the company I was with. I was with Accenture, went to grad school with Carter's, got to work with the president, fly on little airplanes, do some neat things internationally. Kind of that story script of how you would want the corporate career to go. However, they then put the golden handcuffs on you, which, you hear about often. And so it was hard to make that jump. But again, once I made that jump, there was no looking back.
And now, as you were kind of hinting earlier, John, it must be a tremendous feeling for you, because you're really involved in their life. You're changing their lives, aren't you? And you get to see that, and you're playing a very big part in people's lives, aren't you? And that must be, in addition to the money, it must be tremendously rewarding.
It absolutely is. And, I've had clients come back and do multiple deals. We've done multiple deals together, or I literally get referrals from clients every day. And I feel blessed, very blessed.
That's great. What's the best way, John, for our listeners to get more information on you and, and all the different services you provide in the book? Are there any websites that you can direct them to, and you can plug as many as you like?
FranBridge Consulting would be the hub. That's FranBridgeConsulting.com. Please connect with me on LinkedIn, but on our website, certainly sign up for the newsletter. I failed to mention this, but it's entirely free to work with me. I essentially act as an executive recruiter. Franchisors pay me on the back end, sales and marketing expense, and none of that's passed on to my client. Would love to get on a call, understand your situation, give you some thoughts and ideas. And certainly on LinkedIn, too, we're pretty active with our content out there. So we'd love to pass that along to you as well.
Yeah, I'm connected with you on LinkedIn. I saw you have a lot of followers there, too, John. I think it's pretty impressive. You've really branded yourself, and I think that's wonderful. You've done an excellent job. And I was familiar with your name in franchising, which was why I was so excited to interview you today. And I'd like to, invite you back, in the next year or so as you continue to grow, and we could do this again.
I would love to, Marty, anytime.
This has been my pleasure, Jon, and we'll be right back with more franchise interviews. Coming up on segment 2, you're going to hear what every franchipreneur needs to know before buying a franchise. We're going to play a clip from our popular Great Quotes in Franchising podcast right here on Franchise Interviews.
Franchisers, are you looking to reach aspiring entrepreneurs looking to buy a franchise? Are you looking to reach a highly educated audience on franchising? For over 8 years, Franchise Interviews has been giving an up-close, behind-the-scenes look at franchising and entrepreneurship through our website, franchiseinterviews.com, where you can hear and read interviews as well as get tips from some of the most successful sources in franchising. Our weekly franchise radio show where each week you get to hear a new interview with franchisers, franchisees, franchise authors, franchise experts, and attorneys, and our podcast, Great Quotes in Franchising. For more information, go to franchiseinterviews.com or call us at 610-905-2919. That's 610-905-2919.
Hi, everyone. This is Marty McDermott from Franchise Interviews, and welcome to another edition of Great Quotes in Franchising, where each podcast you get to hear a great quote in franchising. Today you're going to get to hear from a legend in franchising. It was about months ago, Don and I were celebrating our anniversary of doing the radio show, and we put a lot of thought as far as who we'd like to have for a guest that particular day. And Don and I both agreed that that person should be George Nadeff, and Mr. Nadeff graciously accepted. For those of you who don't know George Nadeff, he's tagged as the guru in franchising. He's also the founder of Boston Chicken. He had a lot of great quotes that show. This is just one of them where George gives his advice to aspiring entrepreneurs looking to buy a franchise. Here we go.
Characteristics that make a successful no-fat franchisee?
Well, you know, I've always told people to play to their strengths. If you have a personality you know is not a charming one, don't get into the service business where you have to interact with people, because people business requires personality. So, you know, you're not asking someone to do something that's against their grain. So when looking for a franchise, a person should consider the things that they've succeeded in. For instance, if they've been a coach of a soccer team and they had to inspire the kids to run down that field and kick that ball and win, there's something about that individual that is inspiring. So he should look for something that maybe can be along those same lines, that he can use those talents of his. If he's been a teacher, he's been a person that's worked with his hands. In other words, always play to your strength. Don't go into something that's opposite of your personality. That will cause a little bit of a problem. Of course, most companies offer training, but you know, if you put a glove on, it should fit neatly in between the fingers. It shouldn't be something that once you put the glove on, you can't bend your fingers. It's as simple as that. So when you're buying a franchise, it should fit.
And I guess no fat specifically, do you have a checklist you go down that you want each franchisee to be, or sometimes it's just having a feeling of a certain person?
It's clearly a financial issue. They have to have, in our case, pretty close to the ability to finance something between $500,000 and $600,000. So if an individual can't do that, then maybe he should look for other franchises like a Subway or a Quiznos or other that are around the $200,000. So again, here we talk about fitting something that fits their pocketbook and not get into something that's way over their head and put themselves in financial jeopardy by starting in something that is too hard for them to overcome. So again, it should fit their wallet just like it should fit their personality.
Right, absolutely. And you've, of course, been involved with so many franchisees with all your different businesses that you've done. Have there been times over the years that you sort of took a chance on someone that you weren't really sure, but you really liked them, and it's worked out? I'm sure you have a couple success stories.
Yeah, there have been those cases, and again, there have been the opposite. And again, you learn by doing the thing. I would much prefer to tell a person that he is not qualified than qualified. And the rationale behind that, of course, is that I don't want to get somebody into something that he's not qualified for. There are so many franchise selections out there that if a person is doing their research, it allows them the opportunity to really, really take the time and investigate. And most of these companies already have franchises in place. They can pick up the phone and call up the franchisee and say, how you doing? What kind of work did you do before you bought this franchise? Tell me about why you chose it. Would you do it again? I mean, this is a great opportunity as opposed to starting something on your own where you don't know whether you'll ever get the first base. You know, franchising in the beginning is very much like a baseball game. If you can buy third base as opposed to getting to first base, and getting to first base by starting your own business, maybe you'll get the first base, but there's no guarantee. But if you can buy a franchise, you at least can get the third base. That's good baseball. And, you know, when you get the third base, your chances of getting home is a lot easier than being on first.
Wow, that's a great analogy, isn't it, Don? Yeah, and it sounds like you're a Red Sox fan.
Thank you very much.
I love that quote from Mr. Nadeau where he says that, you know, franchising is like a baseball game and it gives you the ability to start on third base. So, again, this is our second podcast, and, again, we'd love to hear your feedback, and we'll see you again soon for another great edition of Franchise Interviews and great quotes in franchising. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.
Franchise Interviews. From Easton, Pennsylvania to Sydney, Australia. You're listening to Franchise Interviews. Franchise Interviews.